Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the journal stands approved. What purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that in the engrossment of H.R. 2954, the clerk may make technical and conforming changes, and that the amendment to page 17, line 17, refer to the first usage of decision on that line.
Without objection, so ordered.
All right, great.
purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Is it ready?
He's on his BlackBerry.
He's on his BlackBerry.
Just before March 31st.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring of the Majority Leader the schedule for the week to come.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I now yield to Mr. Cantor, the Majority Leader, for the recitation of the schedule. Yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, for yielding. On Monday, the House will meet at noon for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. Votes will be postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and noon for legislative business. And on Wednesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Last votes of the week are expected no later than noon to accommodate the Democratic members' issues retreat. On Thursday and Friday, no votes are expected in the House. Mr. Speaker, the House will consider a few suspensions next week, a complete list of which will be announced by close of business tomorrow. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the House will consider H.R. 3193, the Consumer Financial Protection and Soundness Improvement Act, authored by Representative Sean Duffy. This bill reforms the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection to make the Bureau accountable to hardworking American taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, as you know, the debt limit borrowing authority runs out as early as the end of this month. Therefore, I expect action to avoid default as soon as possible. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that information. The gentleman ends with the observation that you expect action to avoid default as soon as possible. As you know, Mr. Leader, very well, as we all know, beginning tomorrow, the Treasury Department will have to start using extraordinary measures because the authorization for the debt limit to be extended will end on the 7th. Secretary Lew has written to all of us and warned us that on Monday, stating that, quote, time is short and inaction could cause harm to our economy, rattle financial markets, and hurt taxpayers. I know that my friend has made similar comments, as I have made similar comments. We agree on this proposition. But I am concerned that we only have 7 legislative days scheduled for the rest of the month. Does the gentleman expect that we will take up or down vote on the clean debt limit extension next week or before the end of this month? And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my remarks just prior, I would say to the gentleman that I'm confident that the United States is not going to default on its debt and that we will resolve the need to increase the borrowing authority of this country prior to any deadline that the Treasury issues. I yield back.
Well, I appreciate that information. I want to say that the debt limit extension will have, Mr. Leader, I want to give you the information, in my view, well over 180 votes on our side of the aisle, so that if that is a clean debt limit so that America can pay its bills, default is not a risk, as the gentleman indicates we don't want it to be, and as the Speaker has indicated that it would be solved long before we would come to any deadline, precipitating another crisis and an undermining confidence. I want to tell the gentleman, the Majority Leader, that I will assure him that if we get a clean debt limit extension on the floor, that Democrats will work with him and his party to pass that in a way that we have a significant majority for that bill. Mr. Leader, I was encouraged to see last week at your retreat that the House Republicans put forward a set of principles for immigration reform and have now expressed a readiness to discuss how to fix our broken immigration system. I'm sure that you've seen the response on my side of the aisle, not only from the President, but from myself and the Leader Pelosi, has been positive. We see the steps that have been taken as positive steps. We do look forward to working together on these principles. We were just somewhat disappointed, however, that one of your members, Raul Labrador of Idaho, was quoted yesterday as saying there was overwhelming support for the idea of doing nothing this year. It's a mistake to have an internal battle this year about immigration. I would hope that Mr. Labrador's remarks do not lead us to a place where we will either not proceed or to pass immigration reform on this floor. The Majority Leader has indicated in some of our colloquies that he believes the immigration system is broken. Again, we share that view, and I think almost all members share the view that the immigration system is not working as intended. There have been 4 bills passed out of Judiciary, another one out of Homeland Security. Homeland Security was essentially unanimous in terms of dealing with security. We have introduced, as the Majority Leader knows, H.R. 15, which is a compilation of the bipartisanly passed Senate bill provisions, dropping the border security provision and inserting the border security passed out of the Republican-led Homeland Security Committee, I think by unanimous vote, but maybe it was by voice vote. I would hope that we could therefore move forward, and that Mr. Labrador's observation that there was overwhelming support for the idea of doing nothing this year would not be the prevalent view. We will again be ready to discuss this, and I can tell you that the overwhelming majority of my party, as the gentleman I think knows, would vote for the Senate bill. We don't think the Senate bill is perfect. We'd like to see a House bill. We've introduced a House bill, and we'd like to consider this on the floor. And I might close with this observation with reference to immigration. I'm sure the gentleman read the comments of former Speaker Dennis Hastert, and I quote him, "The House will act in its own way, as it should, but it should act soon. Immigration reform is necessary for our economic recovery." Again, this is former Speaker Dennis Hastert of Illinois. He goes on to say, "First, securing our borders so we know who is entering our country and for what purpose." I think there is a unanimous consensus that that needs to be addressed. Second, Speaker Hastert said, a legalization of those folks who are already here. Again, I think that there is a consensus on that. We should provide, he goes on to say, provide them with a path to citizenship much like any other immigrant would have. Apparently there is not necessarily consensus on that, but we do have consensus on the first proposition. He goes on to say, these two things being satisfied, I believe immigration reform can move forward. It will make us economically stronger, it's politically smart, and morally right. That was quoted in Politico on February 2nd, words of former Speaker Hastert. I would hope, and I know the gentleman has been very constructive in his comments, that we could move forward together in reaching some agreement so we could see comprehensive legislation on the floor consistent with the principles of both parties, and we could come together and pass some legislation. I yield to the gentleman as to the prospects of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, I think the gentleman knows that we've been on this floor before, and I have said that we believe in the majority that the system, immigration system of this country is broken. There needs to be reform. I think I have also said to the gentleman, as I've said publicly this week, we have to go about a rebuilding of the trust here. I think the fundamental issue right now is there is doubt cast on this White House, this President, this administration's willingness to implement the laws, given the track record that we've seen on laws like Obamacare and others. And I have said to the gentleman, I believe that reform is badly needed. I believe that we've got a situation at the border and the interior that needs to be fixed. Gentleman knows I've been very outspoken on the issue of kids. and the fact that so many are here unbeknownst to themselves, brought here, and know no other place is home, and then stuck without any sense of the fact that they'll be accepted in the country that they know. But before we can even get there, there needs to be some trust. There needs to be some trust built by this President with this Congress, because it seems that the track record is full of examples of the White House and the administration picking and choosing in terms of the regulations, the laws, and the provisions that it wants to implement. If it doesn't like to implement one, then it will just seemingly ignore that. And I don't think that the gentleman agrees that that's the way that this system was designed or that our framers had in mind in terms of equal branches of power, one that makes the laws, one that fully and faithfully executes the laws, and obviously a judiciary that provides that extra check and balance. So again, I'd say to the gentleman, I would ask, if he's talking with the White House, to please ask them to begin to work with us on any number of things to demonstrate that they're willing to actually drive towards the same result and not just work around us in terms of a unilateral result that they may seek. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Labrador, and I'll quote again, said there was overwhelming support for the idea of doing nothing this year. Now, in light of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that the observation is that the system is broken, in light of Mr. Hastert's observation, Speaker Hastert's observation that it was morally the right thing to do, I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, I don't place much stock in this, what I would call a rationalization of trust. Mr. Speaker, let me remind this House that George Bush, President George Bush, couldn't get the support of his party for immigration reform. His party rejected President Bush on this issue. This issue of trust. There are less illegal immigrants having come over the border in the last 5 years than there were during the Bush administration. There have been more people deported, in many cases with tragic results of separating families, over the last 5 years than there were in the Bush administration. This is a question of what is morally right to do to fix a broken system that is breaking apart families, undermining our economy, and abandoning what so many say is the right thing to do. So with all due respect to this, frankly, trying to distract us on this trust issue, this is not a trust issue, this is an issue of law. And the administration's performance, both on border security and on enforcing the law, in this respect, a bad law, a law that ought to be changed, a law that is causing families to be torn apart. And, Mr. Speaker, I've stood on this floor as Chairman of the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe with my colleague Frank Wolf. And I believe Mr. Cantor perhaps has been in some of these discussions himself when we were dealing with the Soviet Union about keeping families together. So I will tell my friend, Mr. Speaker, that this is not a matter of trust. This is a matter of whether the House of Representatives is going to do what Speaker Hastert has urged us to do, which President Bush urged us to do, and which I think there are the votes to do on this floor if a bill is brought to the floor that accomplishes the principles that both parties have articulated. Are there differences? There are some. Do we need to resolve that? We do. But we need to act. And I say with all due respect to my friend, the Majority Leader, that I would hope that those principles do not fall by the wayside as Mr. Labrador projects there is a consensus in your party to allow to happen. And so I would urge us to move and urge us to work together on the principles that Mr. Boehner and yourself have put forward, and which we have responded to in a positive way. Now, Mr. Leader, there are also other business that needs to be done. We continue to be concerned. We were concerned when there were 1.2 million people who had fallen through the cracks and had no help. We now have 1.7 million Americans who have lost their emergency unemployment insurance since December 28th. An additional 72,000 will lose their insurance next week. We believe that needs to be addressed, reinstated, as we have done every time that we were at a similar place that we are today in terms of the availability of jobs and the seekers of jobs. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Majority Leader if he can give us some view of the sustainable growth rate reimbursement for doctors who give to our senior citizens medical care. That was extended with a temporary patch to March 31st, Mr. Speaker, and that needs to be addressed permanently. There is a consensus, I understand, among the committees for a fix on that, but there is no pay-for on that. That's always it's easy to say we're going to fix. It's very difficult to pay for those fixes. And on both of those issues, I would ask the gentleman on unemployment insurance and the SGR whether the gentleman has any view on either one of those coming to the floor anytime soon, and I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, this is on both of those issues. Obviously, there's a lot of work ongoing on the SGR issue. He is exactly right, Mr. Speaker. It's always the pay for. We saw the struggle that surrounded the recent budget agreement, and coming up with $23 million in cost reductions and savings, $23 billion over 10 years, was very difficult. And it's hard for folks to imagine outside of Washington why that is the case when you're dealing with trillions of dollars being spent. And so I share the gentleman's frustration. I would like to see, as well as I think the seniors of this country would like to see, an end to a formula that doesn't work in terms of reimbursements of providers, and one that will allow for a better way and a more quality health care future for our seniors. So I do share the goal that we should replace the SGR and at the same time ensure that seniors are not going to see a diminution in the quality of their care. So the gentleman knows that these discussions are ongoing with our committees as we speak. So far as the UI situation, as the gentleman knows, there is currently 6 months of unemployment benefits available to folks who have unfortunately found themselves out of work. And we care about those folks and want to do all we can to do what they really want, which is to get back to work. And this goes back towards the administration's willingness to work with us. You know, our leadership, Mr. Speaker, sent a letter to the President last week outlining 4 things, just 4 of the many things that he spoke about in the State of the Union address, where, frankly, there's pretty much agreement on what we need to do together. We've not heard back from the administration. One of those things was the Skills Act. If we don't want to accept the new norm of chronic unemployment, we ought to be going full-time overspeed to try and grow the economy, to increase the competitiveness of the American economy so people can get back to work, so they can take care of their families. And we know that the chronically unemployed have a real problem, because if they are without either a high school diploma or a college degree, they are at a grave disadvantage for today's job opportunities. The Skills Act can address that. We've not heard. All we've heard is the President wants to once again create another commission to review all the studies that have been combed through before and that have resulted in our bill, Ms. Fox of North Carolina's bill, the Skills Act. Again, if the administration is so concerned about trying to address the plight of the chronically unemployed, let's go for jobs, not just accepting the new norm. And so again, discussions, building trust with one another, driving towards results could actually help the situation so that we can address the serious problem that plagues the communities of this country. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, for his comments. I might say the Skills Act, of course, was considered on this floor. We could have had a bipartisan bill, and I'd like to see a bipartisan bill. As the Majority Leader knows, I have been a strong proponent of an agenda that we call Make It in America, which wants to expand manufacturing in America. We believe that if we expand manufacturing, grow jobs in America, Americans are going to be more likely to make it in America, succeed, get a job, be able to support their families. So there is, I think, not disagreement on that. There was disagreement on the Skills Act. We believe the Skills Act essentially retreated in investments.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll certainly yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, my point is, Mr. Speaker, is the President, rather than going and acting unilaterally and appointing another commission, could easily have picked up the phone and said, hey, I want to come up there, or y'all come down here, and let's talk about getting this job done, rather than doing what's always done, which is kicking the can, creating another commission to go over the studies and outcomes of other commissions. That's my point. If you've got differences with the Skills Act, if the gentleman does, Mr. Speaker, we understand that. But the bottom line is we both agree we have to improve the outlook for skills for the chronically unemployed. Why aren't we doing something on that? Why isn't there any response from the White House? That's my point. We could do this. We could work together and achieve results. And so, again, I understand the gentleman's disagreement with the Skills Act, but let's work through it. The White House doesn't seem to want to do any of that. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody in America believes the White House doesn't want to do something about that. The President of the United States talked about it in every one of the State of the Unions. He talked about it in this State of the Union. He talked about expanding manufacturing and training. So the President has talked about it all the time, about wanting to invest in giving the skills to American workers that they need to either stay employed or get the kind of skilled jobs that are available in our economy that pay well. There are a number of bills, I will tell the Majority Leader, in the Make It in America agenda that I would love to work with the Majority Leader on that deal exactly with that. I have a bill myself. Actually, I think somebody else has introduced it, called the Jobs Bill, which is job opportunities between our shores, which is exactly on point of dealing with advanced manufacturers, community colleges, and other organizations in cooperation with work investment boards to identify what skills are needed, to invest in the training. The gentleman's correct. We all want to do that, and we certainly ought to be able to work towards that. But he's incorrect in that the President has not only not focused on that, he's worked on that. The Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, has worked on it. Penny Pritzker, the Secretary of Commerce, very committed to that, and as is Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, and they've all talked about that. So let us work on it. But the gentleman talked about, he cares a lot about, and I think he does. Mr. Speaker, I absolutely take him at his word. He cares about those people who have been, through no fault of their own, lost their job. Work wasn't available, they downsized, whatever. They lost their job. And he said he's concerned about those people, as he should be, as I am, as we all are. But one of the real tragedies is particularly with those folks who are 45 or 50 and above. Once they've lost the job, they have a terrible time in this economy finding a job. There are 3 people looking for every 1 job that's available. And a lot of those people, as the gentleman has observed, don't have the skills. So the issue is not just about giving them skills. It is in the interim, do we let them and their families fall through the cracks, fall through a safety net, fall out of the insurance that they paid into, their employer paid into, in the event they lost a job, they would not lose the ability to support themselves and put some food on their table. That's why we're so adamant that unemployment insurance be extended. And, Mr. Speaker, as I said, it's been extended under every administration when the facts were as they are today. Republican administration, Democratic administration, for the reasons that the Majority Leader pointed out. We care about those people. We're worried about those people. So I would hope that that would be on the floor. On the SGR, let me close by suggesting that there is as the gentleman knows, an overseas contingency operations account. That has CBO scores that significantly. The good news is that we are not spending as much money as we were. Spent over $1 trillion in the last decade in Afghanistan and Iraq. Better to spend that money in this instance here at home. I would suggest respectfully that that is one alternative to doing what the gentleman says we all want to do, and that is fix the sustainable growth rate on a permanent basis so that doctors and Medicare patients are not worried about whether their medical services are going to be available to them. I would hope we would look at that alternative and be glad to discuss with the Majority Leader other alternatives as well. Unless the Majority Leader has anything further to say, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, to adjourn to meet on Monday next, when it shall convene at noon for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For more than 5 years, the Obama administration has played politics with the Keystone XL pipeline, a project that's essential to reducing our dependence on foreign oil and creating jobs. Progress has been blocked at every turn by the President, more concerned with his popularity with the environmental extremists than supplying our nation with OPEC-free energy. House Republicans have joined with members of the labor movement to move this project forward. Just last year, I worked through my committee to advance H.R. 3 to approve the Keystone Pipeline with Congressman Lee Terry. The House passed the bill back in May of 2003, but once again we were ignored by the Senate and the President. The State Department just released its final environmental impact statement, which estimates that Keystone XL will produce 42,000 jobs and will be safe. President Obama often talks about wanting to create jobs, improving our economy, and strengthening our energy independence. He claims the support of all the above energy strategy. But with his stopping the Keystone Pipeline and his war on coal, we're losing jobs, we're not strengthening the economy, and we're decreasing our ability to become energy independent. Mr. President, stop dragging your feet and approve the Keystone Pipeline. I yield back.
Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Rise to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the family of Sergeant Brian Lelou from Chester County, Pennsylvania. Tragically, in the summer of 2012, Sergeant Lelou took his own life while he was on duty station at U.S. Embassy in Greece. What happened next was unconscionable. During the course of an autopsy performed by Greek authorities, his heart was removed and not returned to his body before it was sent home to his family for a proper burial. When the Greek government finally sent the family a heart, it was not their son's. The DNA testing revealed that it belonged to someone else. Mr. Speaker, I wrote to the Commandant of the Marine Corps in December seeking answers for this young man's family. The response from the Pentagon so far has been silence. The Lelou family deserves answers. They deserve a peace of mind. It's time for the Greek authorities and the Pentagon to tell Sergeant Lelou's parents what happened to their son's heart, because we know what happened to his families. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, if I told you we could create tens of thousands of truly shovel-ready jobs, increase the prospects of American energy independence, and avoid undue environmental harm, how long would it take you to sign on the dotted line? For the President, it would take over 5 years. That's how long the application for the Keystone XL pipeline has been languishing on his desk. In his State of the Union address, the President talked about the need to grow jobs and pursue an all-of-the-above energy strategy, yet he has failed to take action on a project that does just that. Even after the release of a report from his own State Department last week, clearly stating there would be little to no negative effect environmentally, the President still will not take the lead. This project has support from members of both parties, as well as the support of both business groups and labor groups. The President said he has a pen. Now is the time to use it. Approve the Keystone XL pipeline, get Americans to work, and truly support a plan for an all-of-the-above energy strategy that sends a message to the rest of the world. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? A lot of Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize the Benedictine Sisters of St. Joseph's Monastery in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania, which is located in Elk County, Pennsylvania, and is the oldest Benedictine convent in the United States. The Benedictine Sisters, in concert with their federation, will close St. Joseph's Monastery, with the remaining 17 sisters moving on in the coming year. For more than a century and a half, the monastery has grown and flourished through roles as teachers and school administrators, religious education teachers, hospital administrators, nurses, technicians and dietitians, instructors and promoters of the arts, spiritual providers, citizens, and friends. The sisters have greatly impacted the community of St. Mary's. On February 23, 2014, St. Mary's is hosting a community-wide celebration to honor and thank the Benedictine Sisters, both living and deceased, for nearly 162 years of service to the community and the region. Today I join with the community of St. Mary's as we celebrate honoring the Benedictine Sisters of St. Mary's of St. Joseph's Monastery Day and offer thanks and appreciation to the sisters for their faithful and dedicated service to the Lord. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Culberson of Texas for today and Mr. Ross of Florida for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Monday next for morning hour debate.
The House wraps up its legislative work